Welcome to today's webcast. Before we begin, let's quickly go over how to get the most out of this session. Your main player area consists of 3 windows: video, slides, and a multi-function window underneath. Each of these windows can be moved, resized, maximized, or even closed. If you'd like to return to the default layout, simply click the Restore button on the left-hand side of your screen. The multifunction window is where you'll find some helpful tabs like Questions and Answers, an area to download any available materials, and speaker bios. KPMG has been approved by NASBA to deliver CPE-worthy training. Today's CPE will be tracking your participation through attendee checkpoints, which will look like this. In addition to attending the entire session, you must confirm your participation by clicking Confirm each time this message pops up. Your participation will be tracked, and failure to actively participate will result in denial of CPE credits. If you have any technical issues during the webcast, please submit a question through the Questions and Answers panel, and our producers will respond to you directly. Please submit all content questions through the Questions and Answers panel as well. Thank you, and enjoy the webcast.
Welcome everyone to the final session of our KPMG 2023 Global Life Sciences Conference. My name is Anna Marie de Turt, and I'm a partner in our Healthcare and Life Sciences Strategy practice based here in London. We also have Guillaume Favier with us, who will introduce himself and walk us through a few logistics for this event.
Thanks, Anna Marie. My name is Guillaume. I'm a partner within our Healthcare and Life Sciences Strategy practice, also based in London. For those who have just joined us and want to secure their CPE credits, please do make sure to remain logged in throughout the entire program. Also, if at any point you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to our technical staff or use the Q&A tab within the window. I look forward to hearing what our guests have to say now.
I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished guest speakers, Luca Dezzani, the Vice President of Oncology Medical Affairs at Johnson & Johnson, and Terri, Conneran, a lung cancer survivor and founder of KRAS Kickers.
We will leave you now with our precision medicine leader, Alasdair Milton, a managing director in healthcare and life sciences, who will be sharing with us great insights on roadblocks on the path to precision medicine. Over to you, Alasdair.
So I'm really excited to introduce both Terri, Conneran, and Luca Dezzani to this session entitled Roadblocks on the Path to Precision Medicine. By way of introduction, Terri is the founder of a patient advocacy group called KRAS Kickers, and Luca is Vice President of US Oncology Medical Affairs at Johnson & Johnson. Now, for a little bit of context, we launched the first precision medicine around 25 years ago when Herceptin entered the market. I think it's fair to say that we've made massive strides in how we treat cancer and even other diseases through diagnostic testing to ensure that we really are matching the right therapies to those who will benefit most from them. However, a paper that was published a few months ago in the JCO Precision Oncology by Diaceutics and the Personalized Medicine Coalition showed that only a third of advanced non-small cell lung cancer patients who could benefit from a targeted therapy are actually receiving one. So, we still have a significant number of roadblocks, even in the poster child for precision medicine of lung cancer. So Terri, maybe I could start with you. If you can just expand a little bit more on the very brief introduction I did for you and give us a little bit of background to yourself and KRAS Kickers and your interest in the topic of precision medicine.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Terri Conneran. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a 6-year lung cancer survivor. When I was first diagnosed, I went through treatment and what have you. And as any other patient, you start trying to grasp what you're going through. It was a stage 3 lung cancer diagnosis and went through chemo, lobectomy. And then you're trying to wrap your brain around this. As I got involved with the lung cancer support group, I started hearing about these biomarkers, cancer mutations, oncogenes. So I went to my doctor, like, hey, what am I? He's like, well, you don't have anything. I started seeing in lung cancer groups forming around treatment. So I was disappointed. Not having found a specific biomarker in connection to that, I pushed. I had recurrence. I had another recurrence, kept asking the question. Long story short, it took 3 years in a second opinion to find out that I had a biomarker called KRAS, and it was on the first reports and the second reports. And in spite of my asking for the information, I was not provided the lab results because it was considered unactionable. As an unactionable mutation, I wanted to find out more about this, what this meant. This identified to me the devil that I was fighting. As a person in the personalized medicine, I wanted to know what it was I was fighting, fully expecting to go out, find an existing group and just kind of raise my hand, join with the other members. There wasn't something around KRAS. And so the KRAS kickers began just as COVID started hitting the world. And KRAS kickers has become a tumor agnostic international biomarker group that's really more about patient empowerment. And we've taken and grasped the KRAS and empowered ourselves with using it as an acronym for knowledge plus research plus advocacy equals survivorship.
Thank you so much. Luca, can you just expand and give a little bit of background to yourself and the role that you play inside J&J?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm Luca Dezzani. I'm a physician by training. I spent the first half of my career in clinical practice, and now I've been in pharma for quite some time across different companies, Novartis, AstraZeneca, and now Johnson & Johnson. I spent my entire career in the hemato-oncology space. That's my area of expertise. So very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you both. So I want to start with a little bit on the science. So, we've got these amazing drugs that target certain biomarkers, but some of these drugs have still got some pretty, nasty side effects and causes patients to, drop off therapy. Just how precise are our precision medicines and how do you think we improve on them? Maybe Terri, I could ask you that first.
We've got a long ways to go, y'all. So it's a good start, but as a patient, you can't actually get the medication unless you have the biomarker testing. And so unless you have a comprehensive diagnostics. And it still seems to boil down to diagnostics before we get the first treatments. It's so strategic. And again, I'm just a patient. I'm not a physician. I don't have a science background. I have a business background and a mom background. You need to be so strategic coming into treatments up front that as far as getting the first treatment can have a long-term implication as far as what's next. And that's really where we need to begin, is the diagnostics are going to lead to best treatments. And then once you get that best treatment for you, living within the treatment. And that treatment journey is where it's really about quality of life. It's about living with the disease, and it's about living through the treatments.
Thank you. And Luca?
Yeah, maybe 2 points. Number one, just to clarify that targeted therapy doesn't mean that and hitting a specific target does not mean that you're not going to have side effects, right? You actually kind of academically distinguish between on-target and off-target side effects. That means that even if we were 100% precise on only hitting that specific mutation or target, still patients may experience side effects. So that's, again, just to clarify that the fact that you are hitting a specific target or a specific mutation does not mean that you're not going to have any side effect whatsoever. The second point is that every target is pretty much a story, a new journey in itself. Of course, we learn a lot on how to do drug development, how to create very precise drugs that truly hit a specific biological or molecular target. However, I'm thinking of KRAS just because, of course, that's, with Terri here. I remember when I trained, KRAS was considered an undruggable target, right? And that's been the case until just a couple of years ago. So when we finally cracked the code with KRAS, it was pretty much starting, obviously, again, with a baggage of knowledge and expertise that can be transferred. But still, you are pretty much starting the journey on a new target, pretty much from school through.
Great perspective. So this is a very complex ecosystem in precision medicine. We've just highlighted here just some of the key stakeholders that can kind of enable precision medicine and making sure we get the right treatment to the right patient. It's complex. Data sharing is key. Partnership is key. I want to start with you, Luca, and just ask your perspectives on partnering in the ecosystem and the role that you and also that J&J plays in this ecosystem.
Yeah, I think this is another area where I've been seeing significant evolution over time. When I think of when I first started in working in pharma, probably the thinking and the way pharma was operating was very much HCP centric, right? So we were really trying to bring new medicines to physicians and of course, patients, but there was probably not like full appreciation of this and this slide is illustrates this concept very nicely, like the extremely complex ecosystem we have in healthcare and all the different stakeholders. I need to say where we are now, it's very, very different. I think there is a full acknowledgement and appreciation of the complexity of the ecosystem, but at the same time, the need to engage with each and every one of the different stakeholders you see in this slide. And if we want to continue to further knowledge and access and equity, we do need to play as a network. I mean, there is no single stakeholder on this slide that can fix it, that can solve the gaps and find new treatment options for patients, right? And ensure access and so on and so forth. It's really a network effort. And again, I love the idea of having the patient at the center, because that's really the idea, right? The idea is that all these different stakeholders partner and actually synergize to ensure that we continue to innovate and we continue to bring new treatment options to patients in need.
Yeah. Well, what's your opinion, Terri? Does it come down to trust again to build connections between these stakeholders? Like, where does your organization play, and what's your thoughts on the partnering part of this?
As businesses, as healthcare, as patients, I think it's an evolving network, and a lot of that is driven by like the diagnostics, and things are getting better. As you said, it used to be that the healthcare system was at the center of this. And now our goal is to make it where the patient is the center. Personally, I think that it's really should be more of a Venn diagram with the patient is really inclusive in every part of this equation. And, it's said that, you can be either on the table and you're the dinner, or you get a seat at the table. And as a patient, we've spent way too much time where it was almost a matter of a vivisection going through a treatment journey. And it really needs to be more that we're included every part of that. And that includes preclinical. That includes the transparency that we're kind of leaning towards, recognizing different demographics culturally and whatever. It really does make that difference as far as being able to be included every part of it, from identifying protocols to looking at the research and better understanding. the gap that we've seen, or I've seen, okay, I've lived through, okay, and I continue to live through, because I'm a patient. I'm 6 years out, but I've had 5 recurrences total. I keep buying time. I'm just one lucky example on this side of it, and I'm able to use my healthcare and this chapter in my life to move to the next step. For KRAS kickers, for a lot of the other patient empowerment groups, it's how can we become educated? How can we understand? For us in KRAS kickers, okay, we call it the KRAS hole. The KRAS hole is not knowing if your KRAS is wild, if you're mutated, and that gap is that healthcare gap. What is that healthcare gap? Is being able to know and recognize in a very simple way. What is my DNA of my tumor? What is my personal part of this in the personalized medicine, right? And how can I learn? As a patient, not necessarily, I may not be healthy enough to understand or even care to know what's going on, but the community around me, my husband, my kids, my friends, my whatever, want to know. They want to learn and understand, gain that knowledge for best treatments, best opportunities, understand the difference. As simple as finding information around, you know, what is wild type versus mutant. Okay, this was incredibly complicated after 3 years into this, not knowing where to look, where to get information, or how to find it. Okay, and it certainly didn't do any favors for me or my healthcare system when I asked the questions and I wasn't getting the information, right? And so just recognizing that and seeing that as an organization, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And how can we build that out? Okay, this is not a matter of top-down learning. This is a matter of relationships. This is a matter of side-by-side learning with patients, bringing in the different stakeholders. And I mean legitimately, we bring in the researchers, we bring in the oncologists, we bring in the academics, you know, the patients, the care partners. That's that whole KRAS thing. That's our empowerment. That's more of a matter of a cheer, because if I have something and I can take it and turn it into something positive, that's where the empowerment comes. And if the research is done around RAS, the research is done around KRAS, then patient groups need to be breaking up around that as well.
How do we empower patients to ask for testing? So you said at the top of the piece around you went to your physician and you asked about testing, and you weren't getting any answers. Now you're clearly very vocal. You built a very vocal patient advocacy group, but other types of patients who don't have KRAS, who maybe aren't part of an advocacy group, how do we empower patients to ask for biomarker testing? Because I think it's one of the key things that really can enable the precision medicine journey. So how do we do that?
You know, that's a great question. Why should a patient have to ask? I had testing that was done because I presented as a stage 4 metastatic patient. And so the testing was done. And I didn't get the answers even though I was asking the questions. Okay. Many patients are not getting any of the treatments or any of the testing. So what is it going to take for doctors to choose to take off that blindfold, to choose to do full diagnostics, okay, so that they can make best treatment decisions for a patient?
Luca, what's your perspective? You've been a physician, are a physician, and now in industry. So how do we empower patients to ask for testing? Or to Terri's point, should it be on patients? Should it be on physicians? Time and time again, every time the patient's in there for the first time at diagnosis.
Yeah, the reality is, I think you really need both, right? On one side, I think, you know, science is evolving so quickly that I totally understand physicians who are honestly struggling, especially if you are not a super specialist in one particular tumor type, and if you in your practice see pretty much any oncology patients, it's hard to keep up with science. As I mentioned at the beginning, KRAS, when I trained, was an undruggable target, and it's only been a few years ever since the target really became actionable, and we now have treatments for KRAS patients. And I think the idea that we still need to ensure appropriate education for healthcare providers is critical, right? So that's something that we will always have to continue to do, because again, science is evolving so quickly, and that's where I think patients can help. And actually, I so very much appreciate the work that Terri and all the patient advocates do to help patients that are sharing the same stories, and they may want to know more about their disease, or they really may want to take an active role in navigating their journey. So again, I'm afraid it's not an either or, it's an and.
And then the next question is kind of related to that. Another very important type of stakeholder is the payer. I mean, especially in the US, it's an extremely fragmented payer landscape by state, by plan, public v. private. Some tests are covered, some aren't. Have you seen advances in the payer landscape over the last few years? Like, what's your opinion of where we are from a payer perspective for access to the test and the drug? So, Terri, maybe I'd ask that to you first.
I don't see the payers are the biggest problem. It's not like I can just run down to my local pharmacy and get my own test. Okay. And so if I don't even know it's an option, it's being set up as a barrier before it's even happening. And I'm speaking to the US. And so I see that that's one of the biggest problems. In KRAS, okay, most of us are not druggable still, okay? We're still a developing target. We know it's a target. However, we don't really have treatments, okay? Myself, I'm KRAS G12D. I still don't have any sort of targeted medication and what have you. But there's so many other treatments, there's so many other types of oncogenes that are targetable and can make a big difference, right? And now, as we're starting to see in the research, co-mutations are starting to make a difference as well. So it's not just a one and done. It is a building on. But if I don't know how to ask for it, okay, this is me. I'm showing up at my car mechanic. I'm saying it's making a noise. Okay, what can we do to fix this? Okay, and I'm asking as a patient, same thing for full diagnostics, and then to just get back that information. The folks in our group, they don't know that they're KRAS until somebody does that testing. Okay, and that's true of any of the oncogenes or co-mutation, right? And so how can I even become an informed patient, not even an advocate, just an informed patient, to know that there's options out there until we got that proper diagnostics.
Yep. And Luca, just very briefly, any perspectives there before we wrap up? I know we're almost at time.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that we did make, and we are making constant progress there. I think we also need to appreciate that technology is evolving very quickly. We have testing that, like NGS, next generation sequencing. We have next generation imaging now. So those tests are becoming more and more utilized for all the good reasons. They are also moving earlier in the treatment or diagnostic algorithm. It used to be the case that only metastatic patients were receiving certain testing, whereas now it's moving earlier, which is a good thing. At the same time, the healthcare ecosystem, including payers, I completely agree with Terri, they are only one of the pieces here. They need to keep up with this very rapidly evolving landscape.
Yep. Well, look, thank you both for a fascinating discussion. I know we're at time, but I want to thank you both, Terri and Luca, for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
And the final topic for the summit and the session today will be the role of the patient in the evolving journey of precision medicine in neurodegenerative diseases.
Now, Renjen, a managing director in our life sciences and advisory team, will be joined today with our distinguished guest speaker, Pugh, President of Neuroscience at Johnson & Johnson, and Dr. Howard Fillit, the co-founder and Chief Science Officer at the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Howard Fillit. I'm the co-founder and Chief Science Officer for the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, and it's great to be with you today.
And I'm Pearl Pugh. I'm president of Janssen Neuroscience. Great to be with everyone today.
And hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Dr. Fillit and to Pearl for joining us today. I'm Varun Renjen. I'm a managing director at KPMG's Healthcare and Life Sciences Deal Advisory and Strategy Practice, and I do sit within our precision medicine team specifically. First of all, thank you both so much for participating today. We're really at an interesting time as it relates to neurodegenerative diseases. We had seen a lot of movement away from neuro, but now we're seeing a lot of a renaissance, for lack of better words. And we're seeing not just a renaissance in neuroscience, but really at the early days of specifically precision medicine. We've seen a lot of development in precision medicine and oncology, certainly, and it is coming in neuro specifically, and specifically within neurodegenerative diseases. If I think of things just in the last few months, certainly we did see the approval of lecanemab. We did see last week Michael J. Fox publishing some news on a new biomarker test, specifically alpha-synuclein for Parkinson's. We did see the approval of a new ALS treatment just yesterday itself in the last few days for SOD1 specific. So early days, but still a lot of excitement, certainly. And as I really think about it, what does that mean for patients specifically? As we now have new treatments, new biomarkers, we're really able to really truly harness that power of precision medicine, which we've seen in oncology, really come to these neurodegenerative diseases. But at the end of the day, what is our focus? It's patients. And we're here to help really further treatments for patients and make sure patients get the optimal care. And if I think of that patient journey itself, it's from diagnosing well before disease, diagnosing in a timely manner, stratifying the disease, giving the appropriate treatment at the right time, and monitoring patients itself and giving them the right treatment as the disease monitor. So really, what is the role of that patient really need to continue to evolve in the future itself? So as I mentioned, it's really been a monumental couple of years from the development of some of these different treatments. Still a lot to do. So as we think about it, and perhaps Dr. Fillit, we can start with you. What would you say are still some of the biggest areas for unmet need as it relates to neurodegenerative diseases, specifically around the patient journey?
Well, I think what's really changed over the last 40 years or so that I've been in the field is that today we have real hope, which we haven't really had in the past. We had, as you mentioned, the approval of 2 drugs, which hopefully in July, we'll actually get full approval and get paid for. So we'll actually have patient access, which will be a big advance. And these would be the first disease-modifying drugs in the history of the world that would be available to patients for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And I think part of the precision medicine component of this is that these approvals were really enabled by biomarkers, and particularly the PET amyloid scans that are on the market today and not paid for at this time. But I think as we go forward, we're going to see patients with accurate diagnoses based on either a PET amyloid scan, or there's a blood test now, and we have several blood tests that are coming to market. And I really think for the patient journey, the blood test is going to dramatically change the way patients are diagnosed early, the way they're accurately identified as amyloid positive, and then hopefully given drugs that will remove the amyloid for the brain and slow the rate of decline.
Absolutely. Certainly that earlier diagnosis and getting patients the appropriate test is a massive unmet need. Pearl, do you have additional thoughts as to what it relates to that specific unmet need, or if there's additional unmet needs that you think is also critical?
Yeah, thanks, Varun. Definitely early diagnosis is, key to improving patient outcomes. And we know that a lot of patients delay seeking care because they don't recognize some of those early signs and symptoms, or they just kind of brush them off. And so we really see the need for, increased patient and caregiver education when it comes to some of these signs and symptoms. And that's why disease awareness and patient education is so critical in helping patients to get that diagnosis earlier. The other thing is you mentioned it before, and Dr. Fillit alluded to this as well, like access to care can still remain a challenge for many patients. And so, especially for those who live in rural or underserved communities. So we really need to think about meeting patients where they are to help educate them and continue to prioritize improving access through innovative delivery models.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the theme that's really come across here is that timely diagnosis. And this is the example I like to give people. I'm in my early 40s. I'm 41 right now. I actually have changes of that may indicate I may actually have some pathological changes, dementia itself, but I may not have symptoms for another 15, 20, 30 years. So from that perspective, as we think about it, how do we really ensure all the appropriate patients are screened and diagnosed in a timely manner?
Well, studies have shown that the average time from the first noticing of symptoms by a loved one and the actual diagnosis from the doctor is about 2 years. And the problem with that for many patients is that in those 2 years, really adverse events can occur. For example, unnecessary hospitalizations that are potentially avoidable because many elderly people have comorbidities like diabetes that can land them in the hospital if they're insulin dependent and they're not taking their medication properly because they have cognitive impairment. There's also other barriers to early diagnosis on the part of loved ones. A spouse might be terrified of taking their loved one to the doctor and hearing that that loved one has Alzheimer's disease. And I think that we have a tremendous amount of stigma around the diagnosis that we need to dispel, and especially now that we have some hope. And finally, we know that if a doctor makes a diagnosis, I generally spend an hour with families and explain to them the diagnosis and the challenges and caregiving on a daily basis and quality of life and things like that, and the opportunity for treatments like these new treatments that are hopefully coming to market. But when you consider that the average physician visit in the United States is about 8 to 11 minutes, doctors are, I think, studies have shown somewhat reluctant to really make an early diagnosis because that requires education and counseling, which takes up time, and it's time that they're often not paid for. So we have a number of barriers to early diagnosis, and that's why I think that this blood test that's on the market today, actually in the United States, is going to really change the workflow of how we make an early diagnosis. I don't know that it'll lead to screening. The United States Preventive Task Force still does not recommend screening of patients either by cognitive testing or by other measures. And I think part of their reasoning is this idea that there's nothing you can do, quote unquote, for families and patients who get diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I can tell you that in practicing for 40 years and taking care of people, I've never met a family and a patient that I couldn't help in some way or another, even without the presence of effective therapeutics. And now we're going to have effective therapeutics. So I think all this stigma and nihilism about early diagnosis is going to hopefully be ameliorated by the recent advances in treatment and in biomarkers.
Are there additional perspectives you have specifically as it relates to how do we screen and diagnose patients in a timely manner?
I think Dr. Fillit did a great job, with his response. The one thing that I will add, though, which is kind of more recent as well, is just the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So many patients have really missed a lot of appointments and are not getting regular screenings across a number of different diseases, leading to diagnoses in later stages of many diseases, including neurodegenerative diseases. And Dr. Fillit talked about, a lot of these patients have comorbidities. Well, we see that a lot of these patients aren't even going to their primary care physician regularly with the comorbidity. So even when other signs and symptoms have an opportunity to be discussed, they're not seeing their primary care physician as frequently. And the other phenomenon we see, of course, is just, the increased burnout and turnover across the entire healthcare provider community, which can sometimes result in delays in patients getting seen, particularly by specialists. So I think that's just something to pay attention to, is to ensure, again, that we're, creating that awareness and education for patients and for caregivers to go and seek a healthcare provider consult when they start getting symptoms, not to brush it off, and to kind of get back into the regular routine of really looking after their health and wellness.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm hearing a lot from both of you is that ultimately this is really about the patient and the patient being engaged. How should patients be really thinking about their journey across the spectrum of these neurodegenerative diseases as they evolve? And what is really the optimal way to engage with HCPs? And more importantly, since this is perhaps a little bit unique to dementia, certainly the caregiver is going to be a lot more critical. So besides the patient, are there considerations for a caregiver to be thinking about to be involved throughout the process?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The one of the perhaps somewhat unique features of Alzheimer's is that as people lose cognitive function, they certainly need someone at their side. And there are many chronic neurodegenerative diseases where the dyad is really the group that's being treated, not just the patient alone. And so when I counsel patients, I'm also often educating the caregiver about how to deal with some of the early problems that occur in this disease, like the fact that patients often repetitively ask the same question over and over and over and over again every 5 minutes because they don't remember that they asked it. And that kind of thing can be very challenging for caregivers. It's a lot of stress. And then as the disease moves forward, people lose their ability to drive. They start having impairments in their activities of daily living. And then as the disease progresses further, they start having needs to be met, in basic needs like bathing, dressing, and going to the bathroom, and also ultimately feeding. And so there's a lot of challenges every step of the way. The thing is that we can support the caregivers and the patient with education and also home care, and getting experts into the home, and ultimately thinking about long-term care and where patients are going to live when they eventually progress through the various stages of the disease, from mild cognitive impairment through mild, moderate, and then severe dementia. Diagnosis early can have 5 to 7 years, let's say, something around that, of really good quality of life. And so it's not what many people think of as the most horrible thing until it really kind of gets into the later stages.
I guess I'll just add to it, and further underscore the importance of open and well-informed communication between that dyad that you spoke to, Dr. Fillit, in terms of the patients and their caregivers and their physicians and healthcare providers. This is so critical because, it's wonderful that you're spending, all this time with patients. And as you said, that we may not see that across the board. A lot of physicians are pressed for time. So the more that we can, help to empower and educate patients around disease awareness, access to tools and resources, they can feel a little bit more power to advocate for themselves and really have a good dialogue, your counterparts as part of the healthcare provider community. And, just wanted to emphasize a little bit about the role of the caregiver. And you talked about it, like the role of the caregiver is really, really important when it comes to, helping to recognize when those symptoms start to progress, and encouraging their loved ones to communicate, at least in those earlier years where they have the mild cognitive impairment that you speak to, and kind of work together with them to really help to continue to advocate for their care. And what's super exciting is what you mentioned before. Now we are seeing the advent of promising new innovative treatments coming out that can really help these patients. And so hopefully that will give even more incentive for patients to really come to you and to provide healthcare providers earlier with their symptoms and have that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. We're finally on the precipice as it relates to neurodegenerative diseases about not just new therapeutics, but precision medicine therapeutics, which is going to be game changing for a lot of dementia patients and their caregivers. But if we think about precision medicine, perhaps a little bit more broadly, it's been more successful in oncology than neurodegenerative diseases so far. But if we think about how precision medicine has specifically evolved within oncology itself, are there any key learnings to be thinking about that can be applied to the precision medicine neurodegenerative patient journey? And not just the key learnings, but what are some of the considerations or pitfalls that we should be looking out for and make sure those are avoided to really get these precision medicine assets to the patients themselves?
So,
Yes,
so I think, and I've had the benefit of working in the oncology space too, on the commercial business side. See, I mean, certainly the strides made in oncology precision medicine are very exciting. All those scientific innovations have really improved drug targeting significantly over the past few years. And, in neuroscience, when you think about the growing unmet needs, the aging population, the ever-changing landscape, and just the complex biology, neurodegenerative disorders, it's really made precision medicine, a bit more difficult to apply historically. But we're really starting to see that evolve, and that's again very exciting. And here at Janssen Neuroscience specifically, we're committed to advancing the in that space so that we can ultimately help to reduce the burden and the disability that's caused by both serious neuropsychiatric and neurodegenerative diseases. And, like Dr. Fillit said, it's really the advent of these biomarkers. And here we're looking at various biomarkers to help identify patients that are most likely to respond to a therapy, and then leveraging these large data sets and sequencing to really better understand these diseases and identify possible targets for our research and ultimately design more precise interventions. So our hope is to reconceptualize the way that we diagnose and treat nervous system disorders, particularly in areas with critical unmet needs. One more thing before, I hand it over to Dr. Fillit. You talked a little bit about, what are some of the pitfalls, and, we've talked quite a lot about patient education and what that means, and really educating patients about diagnostics and biomarkers and these new targeted treatments is equally as important. The other thing is, it could increase the demand for genetic counseling. So we know there's a bit of a shortage today already with genetic counselors. And as we do this more and you talk about genetic and familial risk, we may see increased demand in that space too. And then last but not least is payer coverage. Right? We want to make sure that, access to precision medicine treatments are available. It's not just physical access to the treatments, but it's also payer coverage. And, complex and personalized medicine treatments, tend to be adopted first by a lot of the large academic centers. But, with these scientific innovations, of course, you want to make them broadly available. And so how do we really generate kind of uptake of these biomarkers and new targeted treatments in the community setting as well?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with everything Pearl said. I think it was very well described. What we're starting to see already is combination therapy. We're giving people standard of care, which involves cholinesterase inhibitors. And then we're seeing these clinical trials with the monoclonal antibodies being on top of the standard of care. So we're already at combination of two drugs. Going to have combination therapy, again, based on precision medicine with novel biomarkers, where people will be getting, let's say, a cholinesterase inhibitor alongside of perhaps a monoclonal antibody infusion to remove beta amyloid, alongside a anti-inflammatory drug or a drug that recalibrates the epigenetic changes that occur with aging and in Alzheimer's disease, or metabolic disturbances or mitochondrial disorders. And we're going to need biomarkers for all of these. So I think from the point of view of patient journey, there's a couple of things that I think we need to consider. The first is that generally this is an elderly population, and they're often frail. Average age of onset of dementia is about 75. Caregivers are often about the same age. So we're talking about a dyad of people that are elderly, often frail, cognitively impaired, having to come in to an infusion center twice a week to get an infusion. And this is, I think, kind of burdensome. And although I know in trials people have complied, I just wonder in real world populations how long compliance will be maintained. And I'm particularly concerned because what I expect to see, and as a specialist in this area, as an expert, is we know that over time patients decline in their cognitive abilities, and usually about 1 year or even sometimes 6 months. Patients are somewhat worse if they're not treated. And what's happening with these other drugs is these new drugs, monoclonals, is that they're slowing the rate of decline by, let's say, 25, 30%. But that's a population statistic. It's not for the individuals. And so you're in a situation where for the patient journey, they're making this burdensome effort to get these monoclonal antibodies. And actually, at the same time, they're declining. And each individual, we don't know if they're a responder or not. I think that now that we've got proof of concept that removing the amyloid from the brain has benefit, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to ease the burden of taking these drugs for the patients and their loved ones, particularly through what's already in development, which is subcutaneous administration of these antibodies, and ultimately an orally bioavailable drug that can treat the beta amyloid in some way or another to remove it. And we have some drugs in small molecules that are in development now that may be able to do that. And I think ultimately for the burden of the beta amyloid target, this would be the future I would hope for, along with other small molecules that attack, again, the many processes of aging that are relevant to the neurodegenerative process, like inflammation, which is critically important to the rate of progression of the disease.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I think is so fascinating?
Sorry, yes, go ahead.
I don't
Please go ahead.
Just described is it sounds very much like oncology. You know, oncology, we see a lot of combination treatments. Sometimes you're seeing a combination of a monoclonal antibody with a small molecule. And I think what Dr. Fillit just described sounds very much like, you know, how a lot of standard of care treatments are, you know, in the oncology space. And so, you know, and we've made so many advances there. I think, you know, how we evolve our thinking and shift to new paradigms based and insights based on that thinking. It's really exciting to hear that, Dr. Fillit.
But before we can even think about combination therapies for neurodegenerative patients, we first have to think about market access. Dr. Fillit, we did see the recent approval of lecanemab, we talked about earlier, but it does not have full coverage yet based on the accelerated approval. There was talks from CMS very recently that they will convert to coverage as it gets the full approval, potentially in the July timeframe. But until that full approval, many patients are left living in limbo and still waiting to hope to get therapeutics sooner than later. And as we know, for these patients, time is of the essence. So how do we really think about maximizing access, especially as therapeutics get more complex, and the point that both of you brought up as we move towards those combination therapies moving forward and those become a reality itself?
Well, Pearl could possibly answer this better than I can, but I've already been seeing patients who are asking me here in Manhattan, in New York City, about access to infusion centers. And so I've started looking at this and talking with the companies. And I think, you know, I'm a little more hopeful. I know there's a lack of infrastructure for administering monoclonal antibodies to patients with Alzheimer's disease, for example. But the fact is that here in Manhattan, for example, there are at least 4 or 5 infusion centers that are infusing drugs, not just for cancer, but for multiple sclerosis, for example, and for many other diseases, rheumatoid arthritis and other diseases. So we kind of have centers that are used to, they're disease-independent centers that provide infusions, and what they have to do in the case of lecanemab or whatever is buy the medication from the company and then put these people into their standard infusion practices.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So then, Pearl, how does Janssen specifically think about access itself, especially as it relates to neurodegenerative diseases?
At Janssen, we're really committed to helping patients access the treatment and the care that they need. And this means policymakers, payers, healthcare providers, and the patient community have to work closely together to really bring attention to the current challenges and significant unmet need. It's also a need for patient voices to be heard around access to innovative therapies. We know there's a lot of advocacy groups out there, and their voices are really important when it comes to, you know, educating policymakers and payers, as an example, around that need and what they experience. Our responsibility really as a leader here at Janssen in the healthcare system is to really bring some of these insights, some of the data, some of the ideas to really help inform policies that help to address the growing affordability gap and really help to foster a patient-centric healthcare system and enable our unique ecosystem of innovation. And, you know, specifically here at Janssen, we recently issued, you know, our 2022 transparency report. I'd love for those, you know, who are listening in the audience to review it for a greater understanding of how we're working to create a sustainable and accessible healthcare system.
All right, wonderful. It's been a slow burn, but we're finally starting to really see that acceleration of precision medicine and neurodegenerative diseases. So as both of you think, what does the future look like for neurodegenerative diseases patient journey? Will we have solved some of these patient journey pain points that we've talked about? And how do we really solve some of those remaining patient gaps that have not been solved yet?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the development of new therapeutics. You know, the current round of disease-modifying agents slows the disease somewhere between 25 and 30% over, let's say, 12 to 18 months. But it doesn't stop it in its track. And I think the goal of what we're doing in developing combination therapies and precision medicine is to try to stop this disease in its tracks. And in that case, I'll see somebody on day one, I'll see them at 6 months, I'll see them at 12 months, I'll see them at 18 months, and they won't have declined. And that's kind of, I think, the kind of goal. Or maybe they'll even get better, which would be amazing. We don't talk about this a lot, but actually making people better is kind of something that I actually think is achievable. I know it's a little out there thinking that way, but I actually do think, based on what I've seen, and we see a lot here at the foundation, we've come so far in the last 40 years. It's incredible. And I think the fact that we have the first achievement of this 25 to 30% slowing is amazing, but I think we have a ways to go, and I think we're going to get there. And I hope we can stop this thing in its tracks and even make people better.
I love Dr. Fillit's passion, and I am with him, like in terms of really the belief that we can really help to make patients better. I think, the promising science and innovations that we're now seeing, where maybe, the science was really kind of tough and challenging for the last couple of decades, is really bodes well, I think, for the future of neuroscience in general. So I know we've been talking about neurodegenerative diseases today, but I think also in neuropsychiatric diseases and neurodevelopmental diseases, we're seeing kind of the same type of promise in terms of the environment and the scientific advances being really ripe for innovation when it comes to new treatments. So I'm very excited about where the neuroscience space is headed overall. We've seen an increased investment in R&D. We've seen a proliferation of clinical trials across disease states, and these are all great signs. And the promise of precision medicine that we've spoken to today for patients with neurodegenerative diseases are really going to greatly impact the way that we think about treatment in neurodegenerative diseases and the patient journey moving forward. What Dr. Fillit outlined is very much, aligned to our goals here at Janssen Neuroscience, which is really to create a future where serious mental disease and serious mental illness and neurodegenerative diseases are a thing of the past. Super exciting place to be, and I hope everybody in the audience feels that from us as well.
Absolutely. So I think we've heard a lot today, and really it's just exciting to see how things have advanced, how much we need to advance, but what's being done to meet the unmet need and really get these patients the treatment that they need at the appropriate time to treat the disease, to prevent the disease, to slow down the progression of the disease itself. So really, really excited to see how things continue to evolve and look forward to continuing this conversation. So with that, thank you so much to Pearl and to Dr. Fillit for joining us today. And thank you to the audience for listening in, and look forward to just really seeing all the exciting developments moving.
What a great way to end this summit and the final session of today. Whether you've joined us for all the sessions or just a few, from myself and KPMG, thank you very much for joining us.
I also wanted to thank you for joining us today and yesterday during our summit. It was a pleasure having you with us. We look forward to seeing you next year in our 2024 summit. And in the meantime, we look forward to seeing you in the metaverse. Thank you.